We're excited tonight about the book of Romans. We're going to start in the second chapter. And this is going to be a really revealing chapter. Now, I told you that the first 3 chapters is written like you were in a courtroom. And Paul is presenting the evidence. The first chapter he comes and he gives himself to them about his qualifications, that he was a sinner, he was saved, he was called by Jesus Christ to preach the gospel, he was called to be an apostle, and that he revealed through the preaching Jesus Christ and him crucified. And he says that was the power of God, and it reveals the righteousness of God and the salvation of God. Then he goes on to say that the world knew God from the beginning, from Adam. After destroying the world, he knew it from Noah. And they chose not to retain God in their minds. They chose not to worship God. And it says that God made it possible for all of us to see that there is a God because of his creation. The sun, the moon, the stars, the vegetation, the trees, the rivers, the ocean, the seas, the life that he has put here. A man cannot look at the things that God created and he must believe that there is a creator. So they chose not to retain God in their knowledge. So God said, all right, if you don't want me, then I'll turn you over to a reprobate mind. So man has been left to do what he wants to do. God will never force us to do anything. He will never make us do anything. That is our choice. We are a free moral agent. So he said because of that reason that men turn to their own lust, women turn to their own lust. This is what he talks about of homosexuality. That women turn to women, men turn to men, burned in themselves. They didn't want to marry man with woman and woman with man, that they wanted to be together. Now, I'm going to park here for a minute and reveal something to you. Maybe you know it and maybe you don't know it. I'm sure all of us know that our Supreme Court says that it is the law of the land now that men can marry men and women can marry women. Now, since they gave that ruling down, now that's the law of the land. We are going to come to the place that we will have to take a stand. Right. Even though the law says that this is what you've got to do, we must choose. We must choose either to believe this and believe God, or say, well, it's the law of the land and I've got to obey the law of the land. I will obey the law of the land until it goes against God and what God says. Now, you remember when I started out, I believe in evolution. Man is evolving. You understand what I'm talking about? Man is evolving to where that we have accepted as a country something that our country would have never accepted. When they wrote the Constitution, did you think our forefathers would have written that in the Constitution? Do you think 100 years ago that our representatives and our president would have stood up and done that? 60 years ago, 50 years ago, 40 years ago? But we are evolving. Now, I preached this a little bit to Barbara this afternoon about evolution. I said, we are evolving. And she said, no, we're devolving. I said, well, our evolving has led to devolving. I thought that was kind of good. I'm glad she came up with that. I'll get to preach it one day on devolution. That's when I made that one up. I used to be preaching, and if I came across something that I needed some more words for, I'd just make me up one. And people thought I was smart because I used words they didn't know. Well, I didn't know it either. I'd just make me up one out of the air. That's it. devolution. And if I ever got to say that on TV, the commentators, they'd pick that up. So we are evolving away from God, but God has never changed. So we're going to be faced to make a decision. Now, as far as me, I can't speak for anyone else. I will not mistreat a homosexual. God will save them just like He saves anybody else. It's not their homosexuality that keeps them away from God. It's their unbelief in Jesus Christ. Now, you always remember that. That's what keeps all of us from going to heaven. If we won't accept Christ, then hell's our home. It's not the deeds and the acts that we do that sends us to hell, but it's our choice of accepting Christ or rejecting Christ. Now, the decision the Supreme Court made, it is eventually going to affect us as a church. There are two things that's going to affect us. We are a not-for-profit organization. We do not pay taxes. We are tax exempt. We are free to use the money that comes in. We do not give an account to the government or anybody else on how we spend the money. The Bible says the tithe is God. Bring your tithes unto the storehouse of the Lord. So I don't know who tithes and who don't tithe. That's none of my business. I don't want to know. But when you come to church and the offering is taken, you bring your tithes and offerings and you place it in there. We do not give an account to anyone except to God, and then we have a business meeting and we look and see how the money was spent. We vote on how we want to spend the money, and we always keep in mind that that's God's money. It don't belong to us. It's God's money, and we better use it wisely to do God's work. If we don't, we're going to pay a price for it. So since that law was passed, the government has some power over us as a church. And the power is this, that if we don't comply to the law, then they can remove our status as a not-for-profit organization. Then what does that do? Well, we have to file taxes. We're subject to be audited. We have to give an account to the government for every dime that's taken in and every dime that's spent. So if we will not comply, then they can remove our status because we're breaking the law. Now, this is something that you may not know. In order for me to perform a marriage ceremony, do you know what I must do? And what qualifies me to marry people?
You have to be bonded. You have to be bonded.
Okay.
You have to sign the marriage certificate.
All right, first thing, you've got to be licensed, ordained, and then you must go to the courthouse, and you must present your ordination papers to them. Now the state, the government says, all right, we're going to recognize you, but you have got to be bonded. So I was bonded for X amount of dollars to perform ceremonies. Now, if I had not gone and done that, then any ceremony that I would have performed as far as marrying people would have been invalid. It wouldn't be worth the paper that it's written on. Now, the reason I know that is because this is before ever I got saved. I was a teenager. My cousin and his wife, they got married. And this was a preacher, and I won't call his name, you might know him. But he had been preaching for years and years and years. He had even pastored some churches. So they went to him and he married them. Well, 3 weeks later, after the marriage license had gone into the courthouse, he got a letter from the courthouse he didn't have the right to marry him, so he had to be bonded and go through that process. Then he called my cousin and them up, said, "You come on back out here, y'all are not married." Actually, a true story. He went back, they went back, and he had to go through the ceremony again, and he had to marry him. Now, how does that law affect me? Well, I'm certified by the state of Kentucky to perform ceremonies. Now, if a couple came to me, a homosexual couple came to me, and said, "I want you to marry me," and I said to them, I'm not going to. I don't believe what you're doing is right. Well, if they marched down and they told somebody at the courthouse, they called somebody on the news, and then it was reported that I wouldn't, I'm discriminating against homosexuality. You know where this story's going, don't you?
Yeah.
So the next thing they would do is file a lawsuit against me. Now what does that do to the church? I'm pastoring the church. And since I won't sanction and I won't do ceremonies with gay couples, then that would bring you into it. Since I pastor the church that won't, and I won't do it, now you're going to be left with a decision. Do you run me off and get you somebody that will?
No.
So that's a decision. Now, what they did in the Supreme Court is not constitutional, but now we're going to have to live with it.
Yeah.
It's there. That's stamped. Man has evolved to saying evil is good and good is evil. Man has evolved to saying that God didn't know what He did when He made man and woman. That God did not know what He did when He sanctioned marriage between man and woman. So we've changed it, and it makes no difference how they voted and what the law is. One day, I might not live to see it, but I think that I will. One day in the future, you're going to be faced with making a choice. And I know that you'll make the right choice. Now you think on this. How many churches and denominations that you know already that have already made the flip-flop in saying that these things are all right? Now, how many do you think fundamental, solid foundation Christians and preachers are left in America that will bow their backs and saying, we are not going to go along with this? When the pressure is put on whether or not you're going to be an ordained minister, whether or not you're going to be a tax-exempt organization, the pressure is on. When it comes time for you to fill out your income tax, all the tithes and offerings that you gave to the Lord, you can't count off. And somebody said, I can't count them off at Grace Valley, so I'm going to go find me a church that I can count my tithes and offerings on, because that's costing me. You said those are little insignificant things. They may be, but that's the way people think. That's what God said. You chose to empty yourself of me, and you filled yourself with your lust, and then all these other things came in. Now, we're ready to start the second chapter. Now, we can all agree that the Bible teaches that homosexuality is not right. God ordained that. Now, we can judge that. But now this second chapter is going to knock us in the head. This is tough stuff. Therefore, notice that word. Therefore, what have we been talking about? We've been talking about homosexuality. We have been talking about man emptied himself of God and filling himself with his lust and his world and all these other things that men are doing. And he says, an extension besides this, therefore, thou art. I want you to underline, thou art. I want you to write above thou art, not they. Not they. That don't make any sense to me. Yes, it does. God's not talking about somebody else. He has brought it down to the individual. Now do this in your Bible. Where it says, oh man, write your first name. Write your first name. It says, therefore thou art an excusable old man. That's you. That's me. So now this is the way it ought to read. Therefore, thou, which is me, art excusable, Glenn. Whatever your first name. Now he said, you are not excused because you've judged homosexuality and you know that that's not right. That doesn't excuse you from your position in Christ. You're inexcusable. We've judged homosexuality. We know that's not right. So we're without excuse, O man. Whosoever thou art that judgest. Now, what's that teaching us? That we can judge what we can see. We can see two men together, two women together, hugging and kissing, and we go, ah. I can judge that. But because I can judge their wrong and their sin, what does that do for me? Does that give me a license? If I'm not a homosexual, does that give me the right to live my life, and does that put me in fellowship with God? No. Now here comes the kicker. Whosoever thou that judgest, for wherein thou judgest another. Now we can judge that because we've just read it. Thou condemnest thyself, for thou that judgest doeth the same thing. You say, well, I can judge homosexuality because the Bible said it's wrong. And now we're reading, because we that judge them, we're doing the same thing that they're doing. You say, no, I'm not a homosexual. Let me show you what he's talking about. Let's go back in the Old Testament. Don't turn to King David. David walked on his housetop, saw Bathsheba taking a bath, sent a man after. She came over, he committed adultery, sent her back home. She became pregnant. He called her husband Uriah home, and he sent him back into battle after he refused to go down to the house and sleep with his wife. And so he had the captain of the army send him into battle, and Uriah was killed. David called Bathsheba, came up to the house, got married, everything was taken care of. Then God said to Nathan, I want you to go up to the king's house and have a talk with him. He went into King David. He said to David, we've got a problem in the kingdom. David said, what's the problem? He said, there was a man that had one lamb. And that man loved that lamb like it was his child. He ate with it. He slept with it. He nurtured it. He took care of that lamb. But there was a man in the kingdom that was very wealthy and had many herds. And there was a traveler that came through, and he brought him into his house. Instead of taking one from his herd and slaying it and feeding that man, he went over and he got the man that just had the one lamb, and he took the lamb from him. Now, notice, David said, you tell me who he is, because I'm going to kill him. And I'm going to take fourfold of what he has in his herd, and I'm going to give it to that man. Nathan said, thou art the man. Now focus just a minute. Thou art inexcusable, O man, whosoever thou that judgest, for wherein thou judgest another, thou condemnest thyself, for thou that judgest doeth the same thing. Now David stood in judgment of what Nathan told him somebody did in the kingdom. We judge homosexuality. David said, this is wrong. I'm going to kill him. And Nathan said, you are the man. So now, since we're not homosexuals, we do sin just like the homosexuals sin. Are you with me? We're without excuse. Now, what's the evidence? Paul is laying evidence out in a courtroom to show us that none of us are guiltless, that all of us are sinners, and that we're all going to die and go to hell, and there are no exceptions. We are not excused. We are inexcusable. God does not make a special place for us because we're not homosexuals. Homosexuality don't get you into hell. Drunkards don't get you into hell. Adultery don't get you into hell. Rejection of Jesus Christ keeps you out of heaven. So we're without excuse. Second verse. But we are sure that the judgment of God is according to truth against them which commit such things. Now we judge. We judge what we see. If I see somebody smoking marijuana, I can judge that. If I see somebody turn a fifth of Jack Daniels up, I can judge that. If I see somebody with somebody else's wife or husband, I can judge that. But we only judge what we see outwardly. So our judgment is not true. Are you with me?
Yeah.
Our judgment is not true. But God does not judge by what He sees outwardly. Now, I'm a good cover-upper. Is that a word?
Yeah.
I only let you see what I want you to see. Are you a good cover-upper?
Yeah.
You only let me see what you want me to see. How many Sunday mornings, you that are married, you come to church with your spouse? And on your way to church, or before you got in the car, you got mouthy. With each other. And you lipped. And then you lipped. And you pulled in the parking lot. And you got out of your cars. And you walked in the church and said, oh, bless God, bless God. And you're thinking all the time what you're going to say when you get back in the car or you get home. This is awful. This is terrible. How many times at home you were about to tear the plaster off the wall, lipping back and forth, and somebody said, And you go to the door. I've experienced this. I have experienced visitation like this. Why, hi, Brother Glenn, come in. And son, it's like walking into a refrigerator. You can feel it. And they say, have a seat. And then you see their eyes looking at each other. I'll be glad he leaves. Oh, see, we judge hourly. But that's not a true judgment. That is not the truth. Now what does he say? You can judge homosexuality, but you're not excused because you see outwardly sin. God sees inwardly, like he did with David. What David did, he covered up. So we're without excuse. Then he says, but we are sure. That means that's a certainty. You can drive a nail, hang your hat on it, it's not going to change. But we are sure that the judgment of God is according to truth. Now, if God asked me, or if you asked me, what kind of fellow are you? First thing, I brag on myself. Would you? Or would you tell me all the sin and filth that you've ever done in your life? You'd brag on yourself. I'd probably say, well, I think I'm a pretty good fellow. Why am I a pretty good fellow? Well, I don't give anybody cussing. I don't get drunk. I don't run around with wild women. I go to church. I tithe. I try to treat people right. I try to do right. But now, is that really me according to truth? No. That's what I think of myself. Now what does God think of me? See, God knows everything that's in here. So when we're judged, God does it according to truth. Now, let's dig a little deeper. Now, what is the truth? Christ and what we have done and what we do. So he's going, the whole truth is going to come out against them which commit such things. Now, you think on David a minute. He committed adultery, he committed murder, he had other people involved in it, and nobody knew it except him. Nathan didn't know it until God told him. And he just delivered the message that God sent him to do. So he's saying to us that we're all guilty in the eyes of God of sin. We judge outwardly what we see, but we're still all guilty. Third verse, and thinkest thou this, old man? Need to write your name. And thinkest thou this, Glenn, that judgest them which do such things, and doest the same, that thou shalt escape the judgment of God? So if you ask me what kind of fellow I am, I could brag on me, and I could convince you because you don't know the real me. You only know what I have let you see. But how shall we escape the judgment of God? We're not. And the God's judgment is going to be a truth judgment. Because He knows the truth. And I can't jive and shuck Him. If I watched you come in and steal a songbook and go back out, you might tell everybody that I've lied, that you didn't steal a songbook, but if I saw you do it, I know you did it. This is God. God knows Now, when I think about that, that makes me want to live my life a little closer.
Yep.
That makes me not want to do some things that I normally would do. That makes me want to walk the line. That makes me watch what I say and how I say it and how I might hurt somebody. Because now one day, did you write your name in there, old man?
Yeah.
You're going to stand. And the truth is going to be revealed.
Right.
And it's not going to be outwardly. He knows the inward parts. So we can't escape the judgment of God. Two things. He said it's appointed unto man once to die, but after this the judgment. So those are two appointments that we're going to keep in this life. We're going to die, and then after death, when the Lord comes, we're going to stand before the judgment. That's just a reality. Fourth verse, or despisest thou the riches of his goodness, and forbearance and long-suffering, not knowing that the goodness of God leadeth thee to repentance. Now, I've said this. I don't know why God just don't kill that person because of what they have done in their life. They're destroying other people and they're harming other people. And I don't see why God just don't kill them and get them out of the way so that they won't be able to harm anybody else. That's what he's talking about. Just because God hadn't judged them, just because God hadn't killed them, just because God hadn't taken them out of the way, doesn't mean that he won't and that he won't judge them, but he is long-suffering. He has given us time and space, and because of his gracious love and him waiting, that can lead to a person repenting and getting right. I can only look back at you. God should have dropped the hammer on me years ago and took me out of the way. I was no good to myself. I was no good to anybody else. And God should have just took me out of the way. But he didn't. And because he was long-suffering and so merciful, I got saved. From being a heap of garbage, God saved me, wiped me clean, washed me in his blood, and he made me to be something usable for his honor and glory. And the same with you. So don't mistake God's long-suffering and his patience for weakness, because all he wants is to get you saved. Get you into the family of God. We're going to do two more verses and quit. Fifth verse. But after thy hardness, thy is you, thy is Glenn, an impenitent heart, a heart that cannot be penetrated. See, in order for a person to get saved, they must be convicted of their sin. They must have an understanding that they are not a child of God, that their good deeds will not get them saved. But we are in a time of evolution. Man has evolved so that he accredits salvation to being good. So if he does enough good works, in his eyes, that qualifies him to go to heaven. Of all the funerals that I've been to and listened to preachers preach, of all the people that have died in Hollywood, all the wonderful people in America that died, I have never heard of one of them going to hell. Everybody's going to heaven.
Yeah.
What qualifies them to go to heaven? Nothing but the blood. Nothing but the blood. So Paul is laying the evidence. Can you see it mounting up? jury. We're going to either pass sentence. Are we guilty? Is the world guilty? Or are we innocent? Paul said, you're not innocent. So what have we done? Or despisest thou, fifth verse, but after thy hardness and impenitent heart treasures up unto thyself wrath against the day of wrath and revelation of the righteous judgment of God. So man emptied himself of God, and he filled himself with the unrighteous things of this world. Now when it says wrath against God, it just simply means this. You will not yield to God in God's ways. Oklahoma, at the Capitol, this week they came back with a ruling. The Supreme Court of the state of Oklahoma said, the Ten Commandments that is out in front of the Capitol must be removed. 9 judges voted. 7 said, remove it. 2 said, leave it alone. See, we are evolved. Man has got so that they don't want to hear anything about God because God tells them, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. What do they want the 10 Commandments removed? They kept showing pictures of this on the news. Thou shalt have no other God before me. They don't like that. Let's get it out of the way. You can move it that's on stone, but you can't move it because God is the same yesterday, today, and forever.
Right.
Judgment is coming, and it will be according to truth and not what man thinks about us. So, we treasure up. To treasure up means to hide. You know what's coming next, don't you? We treasure up wrath. We hide. We hide all these feelings inside. We hide sin inside. Unrepentant sin. Let me ask you this. Have you confessed every sin since you've been saved that you've ever committed? Right after you did it. The same day you did it. Was there a time that you went on and you forgot about it? A year later you remembered it. Now would there be some that you have completely forgot about? Storing treasure. Now what's the treasure of this world? The treasure of this world is what we want to do and how much we can have that people can see that we can accumulate. That's what the world judges. But he said, that's treasured up, that's stored up. But the wrath of God is going to come against your wrath. And you're going to have a head-on collision. Who do you think is going to win?
God.
So the best thing to do, we're guilty. Don't justify. Quit justifying who you are. Quit justifying what you do. Don't justify, say, I would have not done that to them, but they did that to me. You're without excuse. You're without excuse, Barbara. I'm without excuse, Barbara. Husband and wife, you're without excuse. Sons, daughters, you're without excuse. Forgive it. Forgive it, forget it, leave it there, go on. Last verse, 6th verse. Now what's God going to do at judgment? Who will render? That means you got something coming. You got something coming. Now, when I was a kid, we used hog lard. And how did we get lard? You take the fat and you'd cut it in chunks with the skin on it. That's where you get crackling. Yeah. I love cracking corn. And you'd have a big black kettle out back with a big fire under it. And you'd take and you'd put all the fat with the cracklings in it. And this is what you call that. It was rendering lard. It means that all the fat was going to be gone. The padding was going to be gone. And it would render itself something that is usable. Now, what are you going to use fat for?
Biscuits. Like biscuits.
I'll tell you what, I believe that would make a good furniture polish. It'd draw flies. I could shine my shoes with it. You'd make everybody sick and stink. It's no good. But then when it's rendered, then there's something usable. The skin becomes cracklings, and you can eat it or you can put it in cornbread. I like it both ways. And then you can take the lard that has come out of the fat, and then you can use it to cook something that you like. Now, what's God going to do? He's going to render. That means He's going to give. He's going to give to every man according to his deeds. Now, be very careful with this word. This word don't need to be misunderstood. This word means what you have done. What you have done. Number one, have you accepted Christ? Have you lived for Christ? Have you got rid of all the things that is a hindrance between you and God? If you hadn't, then these things is separating you from the full fellowship and the love of God. So at the day of judgment, He said that we would be judged, and He would reward us according to our works or our deeds. So, we judge outwardly, God judges inwardly. Man judges what they can see, God knows the truth, and He knows all the secrets. There are things that I've done in my life that my wife don't know. I pray to God that nobody in this world knows. Things that I did before I met her, I pray to God nobody will ever know. But I know this. There was somebody that knew it before I got saved. And that was God. But that did not keep me out of heaven. The day that I accepted Christ, I got into heaven. And that's the only way. Amen. Now this has been good stuff tonight.
Amen.
Always remember, you're going to have to take a stand. You don't stand by yourself. God stands with you. The world will not like what you stand for. If the world don't like this, if they could destroy it, they would destroy it. Why do you think everybody comes out with a new version of the Bible?
They want to make it read like they want it to.
That's it. Every version you lay down will evolve. Evolve. Some of them are good, but this is still going to be my authority. This is the last one. I made this statement, and I'll hush. I made this statement when I was young and dumb in the Lord. I was preaching one night, and I was preaching on the truth of the Bible and what Bible to use. And I said, I want you to know if the King James Version was good enough for the Apostle Paul, it's good enough for me. I actually said that. I actually said that. And I thought later, I said, what did, man, they didn't even have it. King James hadn't even come along. And Paul hadn't even wrote it. You can get excited about your preaching sometime. Glad you came tonight. I pray to God that you would be different when you leave. Let's stand.